So the boys just left the boat and their father. James and John didn't even say goodbye. Poof, off they went. As a parent myself, my heart aches for Zebedee. He's left holding the net while his sons take off to follow some rabbi named Jesus. Parenthood is a lifelong thing. I have 2 adult children myself. I guess you could call me an empty nester at this point. My youngest moved out a couple years ago, and yes, I cried. I admit it. And I still worry about both of my kids, even though they aren't under my roof. I think about Zebedee's wife. James and John just didn't come home one day. I can imagine what it was like when Zebedee came home without them. I can imagine Zebedee's wife asking, "So, how was your catch today?" And Zebedee just arrived home. Maybe he's washing off the fish smell from, so he doesn't stink up the whole house. "Oh, fine," he answers. Then there's a long pause. "Zebedee?" "Yes, dear." "Zebedee, where are the boys?" And then Zebedee has to explain to his wife Salome that their boys dropped their nets in the middle of their fishing day and followed this Jesus fellow that they don't know. And we don't really hear about Zebedee again later in the Gospels. The Gospel writers do tell us that Jesus calls James and John the sons of thunder. And later in Matthew's Gospel, we hear about Salome, their mother. Somehow she tracks down where they are, some distance. They aren't in Galilee anymore. They're walking through Samaria and then towards Jerusalem. When Salome approaches Jesus with her 2 sons, and she says, "Jesus." And Jesus says, "What do you want?" Salome says to him, "Declare that these 2 sons of mine will sit, one at your right hand and one at your left in your kingdom." Sure, that's what a mom would do, right? He warns the boys and their mother that she doesn't know what she's asking. Well, how could she? When my kids left home, I didn't know what to think. They were out of my reach. I hoped that I had taught them something about surviving out in the world. But how could I know? Somehow I just had to trust that they would figure it out. And as I mentioned, today's my daughter's birthday, and I visited her on Friday, and she has a new life set up for herself, moving beyond what we began. There are people we have to let go of in our lives. Children grow up and move away. Sometimes we part from people we love, and it's hurtful. Relationships get torn. Marriages sometimes end. People we love die. How are we supposed to start again? And I think about Salome and what she must have worried about. James and John were called. They would become part of a select group we know as the 12 apostles. They would follow Jesus throughout his ministry, and they would have ministries of their own. They would start the early church with the other apostles, including Peter and Andrew, who are also called in today's gospel. How could Zebedee know this when the boys dropped their nets, abandoned the boat, and him that afternoon? Yet, as hard as it was for Zebedee and Salome to let go of their boys, James and John did go on to ministries that were the start of something big. Salome and Zebedee would have to reconstruct the meaning of their own lives. And how do we rebuild after parting with people that we love? I read Maya Angelou's Love Liberates earlier. Love liberates, she says. It doesn't just hold. That's ego. Dr. Angelou realized that there's a rest to the story after we let go. Horatio Gates Spafford was a businessman and a lawyer in Chicago in the 1800s. He and his wife Anna had lost a young son. And then he lost his business in the Chicago fires. Their family needed a fresh start, so they booked passage to England on a ship. Horatio was wrapping up business affairs, so he sent his wife and 4 daughters on the SS Ville de Havre and meant to meet them in England shortly thereafter. Sadly, the Ville de Havre had a collision with another ship. It sank. His wife Anna survived, but they lost all 4 of their daughters. Horatio booked passage on the next ship, and while he was crossing, he wrote the lyrics of a hymn. He wrote, "When peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul." It's a familiar hymn to many. Born of Horatio's grief, and it's been immortalized. We know it and sing it today. It brings comfort to a lot of people. He loved his children very much. He grieved terribly for them, yet he loved them enough to let them go and begin again, setting across the ocean to reconnect with Anna. And Zebedee and Salome, I'm sure, loved James and John. All the disciples that Jesus called had families and parents and maybe even wives. When we part from those we love, it's often for reasons we can't possibly understand. But we do not do it without new beginnings. And we don't do it alone. There is always a rest of the story. That part of the story that's yet to unfold. We're told that Salome, the mother of James and John, accompanied the other women that first Easter morning to the tomb. She was one of the women to first learn that Jesus had risen. They were the ones to first proclaim the resurrection. James and John had a purpose when they left their nets and their father that afternoon, and Salome had a purpose too, to speak the gospel that first Easter morning. How could she have known? Horatio Spafford and his wife Anna had a story unfold after he wrote the lyrics to that hymn. A story I am sure neither of them could imagine. This couple who had lost everything had more children. They started their own church. They colonized in 19th century Jerusalem. they started a new mission that ministered to Muslim, Jewish, and Christian people without trying to convert anybody. Horatio and Anna adopted a Jewish teenager who went on to do his own great things. They even provided shelter for refugees that were fleeing the Armenian genocide. In spite of the magnitude of their great, great loss and their grief, which was real, and they named it, they had an amazing rest of the story. Like many of you, I've had to say some really hard goodbyes in my life, and I've grieved them. I expect I will have many more. You all are part of my rest of the story. And knowing that there's a day after goodbye and that there's still so much good to experience, regardless of our age, whether we see it now or not, knowing that there's a rest of the story can help so much. Love liberates, as Dr. Angelo says. It is not just love for others, but realizing that we ourselves are loved. Let us be liberated and look to tomorrow with great hope. Let us look forward to our rest of the story. Amen.